Hey guys, welcome back to Woman Crush Wednesday, October 2017, featuring Mrs. Danielle Edwards.
Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to Tina Just Me. I have a very special guest with me here today. This is Miss Danielle Edwards. Danielle has a really poignant and personal story about domestic violence. October is Domestic Violence Month, and I just wanted to feature her so that she can tell her story. So thank you for being on my channel.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So first I want to hear about you. Can you give us some background about yourself?
Well, my name is Danielle, and I'm born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana. Who dat? I've been in Atlanta for many, many years. I came here to go to school. I went to Clark Atlanta, and I didn't think I would stay here, but I did. I got married and had kids here, and so my children are Georgia peaches.
Like I said earlier, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, not just Domestic Violence Month. Can you start with your experience with domestic violence? Can you tell us how it has affected your life?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So, domestic violence, and the way that it is my story is that when I was 9 years old, my mother was murdered by her ex-boyfriend. Of course, that was totally life-changing for me, and it ultimately led me to going on to pursue a master's in social work so that I could work in the domestic violence arena. My mother was the oldest of 5 kids, she was the oldest of 5 kids, so this was devastating to both of her parents as well as her siblings. I was her only child, so this was devastating to me, and
Right.
So
tell me about your mom.
Oh, okay. So my mom, her name is Cheryl. Cheryl.
It's interesting that you used the present tense. Her name is Cheryl, not was.
Yeah, she is. My mother's name, will always be my mom. So my mom's name is Cheryl. She too is from New Orleans, and she was murdered when she was 30.
What kind of person was she?
I thought she was a silly, she was fun, she was silly. We were very close. I really, it's interesting for me because I'm now 38. I recognize that I outlived my mom. My mom and I didn't get a chance to go through the teen years,
right,
where, she gets on my nerves and she go, blah, 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 or, whatever. And then we come back later in life and we're like the best of friends. We didn't get a chance to do that.
Right.
I mean, I was raised by my grandmother, which, that was great. But those are the things that I'm coming to terms with, like, we never had the opportunity for me to be 16 or for me to be 18, or you know what I mean, for me to come, like, we never had teenage conversations. We never had young adult conversations. We don't have, I never got a chance to talk to her about being a mother.
So about your mom, you said that she was fun-loving and you guys had fun. You probably didn't see a lot of the dangers when the perpetrator came around. So let me ask you this. Looking back, do you think, what can you tell me about your mom that you think may have made her vulnerable to you?
I can't really say that there was anything about her specifically that made her vulnerable, because the issue was really with him. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions. There's all kind of thoughts and things about that, but I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions, is that there's something about the woman that attracts the person to her. But having studied, domestic violence and dynamics and things like that, the issue is truly with the perpetrator.
Well, tell us about the perpetrator. What do you think, looking back?
Honestly, I knew him. We actually, they went to middle school together. So they grew up, and New Orleans is not a large, city or whatever. He had daughters from a previous relationship. We knew each other. We went to elementary school together. There would be times when we hung out together and we would all go together and play out. I mean, he was a corrections officer. And again, when you think about domestic violence and they think about perpetrators, they have these ideas that, I mean, even if we think about the word wife beater, the term wife beater, that's a construct, that's a perception that, you know, a person that's an abuser is drunk, you know, perhaps uneducated, lives in a trailer park or lives in the hood or something like that, and these are all the reasons that they abuse. This was a person who was a corrections officer. He was in law enforcement. When I look back at my mother's situation, all the signs were there that he was going to try to kill her. They were all there.
What were those signs?
One of the major signs, post-separation stalking. They were not together. I'm not talking about, you know...
You're not talking about somebody being persistent to get you back.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about someone sitting in the cul-de-sac down the street from your home, watching your home. I'm talking about, you know, I will share this about him, you know, my mom came home maybe about a month before she got killed, and he was waiting in the cul-de-sac, and when she got home, he jumped on her and beat her up in front of the house. You know, he came to my school. I can only imagine the fear or the anxiety that my mother felt about that experience. This is a man who has put his hands on you to the point of putting you in the hospital, and he has access to your child. He was controlling. And this is a story I got from my dad, and he asked my mom, if we get married, is Danielle gonna change her name to a name that begins with the same letter as mine? Because he had his name, all of his children's names had the same first letter. And so he asked my mom, if we get married, are you going to change Danielle's name to a name that, you know, starts with the same letter? My dad has told me that one time that he was over there, he confronted him and said, "You're around here a lot." My dad said, "My daughter lives here. As long as my daughter lives here, I'm always going to be around a lot."
Do you have a problem going back to that day and talking about it?
Not at all.
Let's go back to that day. Where were you?
I believe when it happened, I was either at school or on the way home from school, because it happened in the afternoon. I remember very specifically that day. And to be clear, this was the day that she was going to get a protective order against him for the assault that happened in front of the home and put her in the hospital. I didn't know that's where she was going. I know now, but I remember begging her that day to stay home with her. And she said no. And so I went to school. She went and got a protective order, or she at least went to the court to do that. And then she was killed after that.
How did you find out?
So I was home, and I was in my room, and I was on the phone with one of my childhood friends that grew up in my neighborhood. And my grandmother came upstairs, and my uncle was in the room across from her. The door was closed. He was in the room across from mine, I'm sorry. The door was closed, and I saw her knock on the door, and my uncle opened the door, and she said something to him that I couldn't hear. And I heard his response, which was, "What?" Or, you know, something like, I heard a shocked response. And then my grandmother said, "I just saw it on the news." And I turned on the news, and I'm flipping channels back and forth, trying to figure out what station was she watching and what did she see, is what I'm thinking. And I'm flipping. I never found it. Then police officers started arriving to the home. Family members started coming to the home. The pastor from the church was there. So all these people are showing up, and I, you know, being the 9-year-old that I was, I asked if I could go outside and play. At the time, I wasn't allowed to go outside on school nights. And so I said, with all these people here, do you mind if I go outside? That way I can get out of the way. And so I go outside to play, and all the neighborhood kids were outside playing, and they're looking at my house and like, "Danielle, what's going on?" And I'm thinking, I have no idea what's going on, but I got a chance to come outside on a weekday, so let's play,
Right.
I'll find out what's going on
later.
And so, and then I get called inside, and that's when I'm told. Yep.
How was that for you?
It was weird. The way that I remember it, I was talking to one of my mom's other brothers, my uncle. He was telling me his his recollection of that day. And I didn't say it to him at the time. I was actually fascinated because his recollection of that conversation is completely different from mine. I recall him calling me inside and my grandmother telling me. He recalls it as him having a conversation with my grandmother in which she said she didn't know how she was going to tell me, and he offered to tell me. And so his recollection is that he called me in and he told me. My recollection is that my recollection of that day has never been challenged until that conversation with him. And I found it fascinating because to me, in the work that I'm interested in doing, which is grief work and trauma work, I think it's amazing that we were both, I think, experiencing the same traumatic event, but his mind remembers it this way and my mind remembers it that way. And to be honest with you, I never doubted the way that I remembered that. Until that conversation with my uncle. And so, but my initial reaction was, it was a very childish reaction. It was like, I thought about retaliation. I was like, oh, you killed my mom, so then I should hurt your child. That was the first thing I said, actually. I should kill your child.
The way you talk about it so matter-of-factly is like, I wonder if you stuffed any feelings about it.
I don't really think that I have. I talk about it very freely, and it does make other people uncomfortable. Because domestic violence is uncomfortable, murder, homicide, that's uncomfortable.
I just find it fascinating. I'm looking at you like, really? But when you look at somebody who's gone through that experience, I just find it fascinating the way people deal with different things.
Yeah.
So and it's not the way you would think sometimes.
And that's the thing. I remember growing up and being the kid who didn't have a mom, or being the kid whose mom got killed. And people will say, oh, I don't know what I would do if I didn't have my mom. And what I say is, you will live. You're gonna put one foot in front of the other. You're gonna live, And I can only say that because I'm speaking of someone who has actually experienced it. But I mean, even as a child, I recall, laying in my bed at night, lying in my bed at night, looking up at the ceiling and asking God why, or looking out my window up at the stars and saying, God, why? So I definitely felt like I was definitely processing everything. Why? And even when I was in my early 20s, I decided to go to therapy. I was like, let me just see. Maybe I have some repressed, maybe there's something in there. And really, no. I mean, but see, and so this.
But that's why I asked, as a 9-year-old, do you think as a child, maybe being so young, it kind of saved you from?
I can't really say that it necessarily saved me. I just can only speak on what my experience was. When I was in grad school, we had to do an assignment, and this assignment really kind of going to get my MSW. I went there with the intention of working with domestic women, survivors, women who had, experienced with domestic violence, and doing counseling, helping them from a faith-based perspective, because that can be a conflict. Not the subject of today, but faith and belief can be a challenge for some women in trying to get out. Right. But, so I remember going in school, that's what I'm going to do. I'm a Christian. I'm going to go and learn how to be a therapist, work with domestic violence, and I'm going to help women work through their faith issues so they can get the help that they need.
When you say that, the faith issues, a lot of times women are like, oh, well, God doesn't like divorce, or I'm trying to save my marriage.
Those
blah,
exact
blah, blah.
things. Jesus said, turn the other cheek, and all of that other stuff. But there are many other scriptures. One that I love, and I don't know if you're going to put this in there or not, but it talks about the very scripture that talks about God hates divorce. If you read the very next verse, it says, and this is not verbatim, but it also says that, and he hates a man covering himself in violence like a garment. Wow. That is the very next line. And so I would say, if he hates divorce, how much more does he hate the act or the actions that would make a woman think that that's her only option to live.
Right.
You know, I have to get out of this or I'm gonna die. But back to school, so we had to do an assignment where we had to go back to our family, our household, as it was on our 12th birthday, and try to do an objective assessment of the family in the household. Oh no, I'm sorry, your 13th birthday, because 13 is like 13 is like, you know, you're a teenager kind of thing. Excuse me. And I remember thinking, I don't remember my 13th birthday. Why don't I remember my 13th birthday? And so I really started thinking a lot. And then, you know, we asked questions about who are the members of the household physically, you know, who live there. And then like who is still an emotional member of the household. And I thought about my mom, because I saw, like, when I went back and thought about my experience growing up, I could definitely see how this event completely changed my entire household. My cousins and I, we were sleeping, or we were supposed to be going to bed rather, and one of my cousins, he shot up in the middle of the night. He was just in tears because he was convinced that he saw my mother in the hallway. I mean, and my grandmother, he was in the middle of the night, he's screaming and hollering, and my grandmother's telling him to be quiet, you know, from her end of the house. And he's just screaming and crying and, you know, saying that he could see my mom. And it's so crazy because I remember thinking, I wish I could see her.
Wow.
You know, he was terrified or just completely visibly shaken by this experience. And while he's crying and screaming, I'm thinking, I wish I could see her. And then my grandmother's down the hall saying, be quiet. And I think when I look back on that, I think, what was that feeling for her?
Wow.
You know, so just how it just impacted, you know, just everybody in my family. You know, and he was younger than me. When, you know, and my other cousin was there, and we talk about that night. We remember that night, being kids, and, you know, our, you know, family member crying and screaming, and my grandmother saying, be quiet, be quiet. And just, it was just very traumatizing for everybody, I think. So up until the funeral, I remember my grandmother asking me things about the funeral. For example, she said, you know, do you want us to do an open casket or do you want us to do a closed casket?
Where was she shot?
She was shot multiple times. She was shot at least 10 times. I think 11 specifically, but definitely at least 10 times. She shot multiple times. I remember her saying, do you want us to do an open casket? Do you want us to do a closed casket? And I was like, well, people are coming to see her. I'm thinking like a 9-year-old. I'm not thinking about, you know, any trauma to the body or anything like that. I'm thinking people are coming to see her, so let's open it. Because her thought was we can close it and do a picture, or we can leave it open. I said, let's open it. So we did. I remember the funeral. I remember the you know, the wake and all of that stuff. I remember going to the burial site. I don't remember much else, like details or whatever about that.
And not to put any more focus on the perpetrator, because he is incarcerated for this. But how was it after the funeral and after the murder and all of that, up until he got incarcerated?
Actually, I mean, he was in jail the entire time, so I never, I didn't get a chance to, they didn't allow me to go to the trial, you know, or anything like that. So I didn't go. In fact, and they didn't have to go and find him. The police arrived. He had just done it. So they didn't have to find him, you know.
So there was no him going on the run or hiding or nothing like that?
None of that, no. Because he had followed her and her friend. And he was, you know, so he had followed them there. And some other person knew that he was nuts at the time. And so I think they called the police or something like that. And when the police got there, he had just did it. So he told them what he did. So he was immediately, you know, he was gone from that point on.
So this experience, and I know I was talking to you earlier about my own personal experience, and I'm like, it's funny how God lets you go through some fire to reveal what he wants you to do. So this says, made you more passionate about domestic violence and helping women and wanting to write a book about that? You want to talk about that and your foundation you want to start?
Oh, so the thing is, I've always been, I didn't necessarily think of myself as being passionate about domestic violence. I just think it was something that shaped my life. I say it wasn't a passion. It was my experience. Like, I can't, so that's why I say
You can't separate yourself from that experience.
yeah, it was my experience. So if I had friends who were in situations, I was kind of like, you know, you might want to watch that or be careful about that, and that sounds kind of crazy, and he might not be all the way, you know, he sounds like this might be an abusive relationship. And I would say things like, it only gets worse. That was my line. You need to get out because it's only going to get worse. Because I had gotten a chance to experience what worse meant. This will end in death. You can play around with this if you want to. It will only get worse, and you will potentially die. So you need to go on and figure out how you're going to get out of this. But fast forward to school, like I said, I wanted to work with women. And after I did this assignment and a couple of other assignments, I really recognized that for me, domestic violence isn't really my story. It's my mother's story. I've never been in an abusive relationship. It's my mother's story. My story is being a childhood survivor of a domestic violence homicide. And so that's the story that I speak on. Like, how did that impact me? And there's so many other children. Every time I watch the news and you hear about murder-suicide or just a murder or whatever, and there are these children that are left behind, they are a member of a community that, of course, none of us want to be a part of.
Right.
But, you know, that's the work that's what I want to commit to working towards, children affected by domestic violence homicide.
Whew, we had a lot to talk about. Stay tuned for part 2.